Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we have a special video. I will be teaching you how to make this beautiful baby memory quilt. I made this for my lovely daughter Melina. She's now 13 months old, and all of the pieces here are from clothing from when she was a little tiny baby. The first step is to get any clothing articles that you would like to use. I'm using pants, shirts, onesies, old dresses, and I am just a little sad because I don't want to rip them up and cut them up, but for the sake of this blanket, I think we will take one for the team. Now I'm going to take my Rotary Blade and I am going to cut a piece of it out. You can use a template if you can find one of the size that you like. I am using a toy because it was the perfect size for me, and the store that I went to didn't have templates, so you can also cut one out of cardboard if you'd like. Let's take this little shirt. It is so cute. I remember she was so little wearing this. Oh my gosh. You can actually just cut the seams off like this. Okay, almost looks like a tank top. So I actually want to use both sides of this material because I just love the colors of it. I am going to leave this material like this and then grab my Fusible Interfacing, and one side is a little rough and the other side is smooth. Let's go ahead and use the rough side facing the material. So we have our fabric. You want to make sure you put the Fusible Interfacing facing the back of the fabric, and make sure you're using the rough side because that's the part that attaches to the fabric. Now I'm using a Cricut Easy Press Mini. However, if you don't have one, you can definitely use an iron. In fact, it will probably be a lot faster if you use an iron because it will cover more surface than this Cricut Mini Press. The purpose of adding Fusible Interfacing to the fabric is because baby clothing is fairly stretchy. That way babies are able to move around. However, we don't want our material to stretch because we are making a quilt. So by adding the Fusible Interfacing, it allows your material to stay in place and not stretch out. Don't forget to wash all of the baby clothes before you start this project, just to make sure everything is clean and already shrunk. This is how it looks when we add the Fusible Interfacing on it, and it essentially becomes one piece of fabric. So I am going to now take my template and use the Rotary Blade to cut it, apply some pressure on there. All right, so as you can see, I did mess up a little bit, but it's okay. I can just fix it with my Rotary Blade. Trust me, you are going to make mistakes. You just have to just understand that and then do your best to do what you can, but do not stress about not being perfect because every time you make a mistake, you learn a little bit. But also try to get it as square as possible because it will help you in the long run. Now you're going to continue to cut the rest of your fabric squares. The amount of squares you need depends on how big you want your quilt, and that is totally up to you. I didn't really count how many fabric squares I used, but I know that I made the quilt a pretty decent size, at least big enough for a toddler size mattress. After you have all of your fabric squares, we're going to put the print side together like this and try to make it as even as possible. You can use pins to make sure that your cloth doesn't move, but I am just going to freehand it and start sewing. This is actually the first time I've ever sewed anything. Well, when I got this machine and I figured out how to thread it. So that is just to give anyone who needs a little bit of motivation or inspiration, you can do it, because if I learned how to do it, you can do it as well. Literally, I just learned on YouTube how to sew. Anyway, so let's go ahead and do this. I am putting my fabric in here, putting my footer down, or whatever it's called, and then here we go. That was a little crooked, but that's okay. Don't shy away from using texture when you have fabric. So this is a cute little shirt onesie that my daughter had, and it has like this little flower that I thought was so cute. So we're gonna add that on here. And remember, we're just putting the print side, matching the print side. I think that one went really well. Oh, how cute. See how cute that is. Oh, that's so cute. And you'll notice that like the face of this little, I don't know what that is facing the opposite way of the hearts, because I want the pictures to be different. So it's not just like, oh, this is the right way the blanket looks, if that makes sense. I can't believe that I'm actually sewing. I am so happy. So now we have a long piece of fabric because we sewed the little squares together. We're going to press it, and you can use an iron for this. I'm using my Easy Press, the giant one, because it will go a lot faster. And this will help for your infusible ink to just make sure it's on the fabric completely, just in case something happened where you didn't press it all the way. And also it is so that the seams could lay down properly. You see how this one is up and this one is down after I press it? So we're gonna do that for the entire row. Right. So now I'm going to take two long pieces. I also previously pressed this one. And we're going to use safety pins to make it easier for us to sew it together. So I did take a picture of how I wanted it. So this one goes here. Okay, good. So what we'll do is flip over the pieces so that the print is facing the print. And this is actually pretty crooked because this is my first time sewing, so I didn't really sew this one that straight. So what we'll do is we'll kind of line it up on the table and then just try to make it as straight as possible. So we'll do this. Now we're going to take a safety pin and just pin it. So that way when we sew it, it doesn't move. There is a little excess material on this end, so I'm going to cut it off just so that it could be a little bit more square. I am going to try to also trim the rest so that it's just easier that way. All right, that looks good. Now it's time to sew. Okay, so I did learn a trick while I was watching a YouTube video about how to have some extra material here so that way you don't have to keep restarting your sewing machine, and it has been working amazingly. So let's go ahead and get started with sewing this. So here we go. You'll repeat the process until you have enough fabric for your quilt, and then you want to face the print to each other and then pin down the fabric pieces to each other just like this. And then you're going to go back to your sewing machine and sew it. And by the way, I wanted to point out that I am using what's called a walking foot. If you're new to sewing like I am, this is something that will help you when you're making a quilt. It just sort of makes it very easy for your machine to sew a straight line when you're making a blanket. So it came with the machine that I bought. However, some sewing machines do not come with a walking foot, so you may need to purchase it. The quilt batting that I'm using is 80% cotton and 20% polyester. And here's how it looks. I am spreading it out and then grabbing the fabric that I sewed together. So I didn't show you when I sewed all of that because you kind of just repeat the process. But you want to make sure that you spread it out nice and evenly so that you can measure your quilt batting. So before you cut it, you want to actually use safety pins to pin it on there, and then you can cut it. You also want to go ahead and just add more safety pins so that your quilt batting doesn't move around, because we'll be adding our flannel. So you can use whatever material that you'd like. I'm using flannel. Be sure you wash your flannel before using it because you need to make sure that it shrinks prior to you making your quilt. And then you're going to place the fabric that has the quilt batting on it. And remember, we put safety pins on it. And we do want to repeat the process of adding safety pins so that the flannel, the quilt batting, and the fabric that we sewed together can all be one. And then you're going to trim your flannel so that we can start sewing it all together. I did leave a little excess material on the end of the flannel just in case, because you can always take it apart, but you can't add. And then I'm using clamps because it's pretty thick now, right? We have 3 layers now, and I'm using clamps to make sure that it doesn't move when I sew it. And I'm gonna go ahead and roll it up. I learned this trick while watching a YouTube video. So you can roll it so that way it's easier, and then you can transport it to your sewing machine. As you can see, I have a little bit of fabric in the beginning of the quilt because it just is such an easy way to make sure you don't have to keep repeating the process of starting your sewing machine over again. And I'm sure I'll get better over time, but that definitely helped. Okay, so you also notice that I am removing the clamps as I get to them. The clamps are really helpful because we want to make sure that our quilt is staying in place. Once we have our ends sewed together, we are going to actually go back and trim the excess flannel because I know that I have enough. As you can see, I did add satin binding to 2 sides of the quilt, and I didn't record that part just because I'm not 100% great at it yet, but here is how the satin binding looks, and you have to open it and attach it to the ends of your quilt just like this. And by the way, this is not ribbon, so if you are new to sewing like I am, I went to the craft store and they were like, oh, you can just use ribbon. And no, you cannot. It's called satin binding because it's specifically made for quilts. Okay, now we go back to our machine, and this is how you add the satin binding. I do want to point out that this was a learning curve for me, adding the satin binding on there. It was very thick, so it did take a little while for me to get the hang of it. Now, I did my best adding this satin binding. It is not 100% perfect. However, I think it came out decent for my first time ever making a quilt, but I definitely encourage you to look up some more info on how to add it so you can do a better job than I did. Here is how the quilt turned out, and I absolutely love it. Every time I look at it, I remember all of the beautiful memories that we've had together so far. And I kind of made this as a birthday gift for my daughter when she turned 1. And I just learned so much. I encourage you to make one, even if you've never sewed before. You can teach yourself anything. To my daughter, Melina, I love you so much, and I can't wait to make more memories with you.